let's start the stream and see if this works.
Okay, fingers crossed. Okay.
All right, welcome. Can everybody in the chat hear me? Is that you playing music?
Oh, it was just the ad. Because the video started. Okay. Yeah, and can people hear me as well?
All right. Can you guys hear Snek? Hold on, there's another computer that's playing. Let me turn that off.
Okay.
All right, we should be good. We're rolling. Sounds good. Yep, everybody loud and clear. All right, welcome. This is, we've been wanting to do this show for a while, the stream. And I have with me Snek, one of our French ortho bros. I've just been here reading my copy of How to Mind Control Snek by Ignatius Loyola. Snek, are you there?
Yeah. I'm there.
I had the spiritual exercises, and I'm going to figure out how to mind control you with the key phrases and words.
Yeah.
Anyway,
okay.
What's up, man? How are you?
I'm quite alright. Yeah, it's very good being here. I want to thank everybody. Yeah, it's a precept gang and all there's a French team because we've been working on a lot of stuff, and it's good that especially having these kind of sources that are not available for there's a English speaking public.
Yeah. So hold on. So let's tell everybody what you do real quick, and just kind of lay that out there that you try to translate a lot of these French sources that are not in English, right? Is that what you're up to?
Okay, so I'm part of a collective. Like basically, we have a server, a website, YouTube channel. We are supervised by a deacon. So we are French, a lot of French converts and so on, and our collective is about trying to get out sources, easy apologetics, and new stuff. Not only translating, but usually bringing out the ideas and sharing. And we've been involved with some of the people that follow you as well, the Precept gang, and we have our own server, our own thing. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Okay, so and I've got the links in the description to the French Ortho Bro Discord, to your YouTube channel, and then if they want to follow you on Twitter. So everybody's got that information, and we'll touch on that again. Real quick, I want to make a point about what's coming on YouTube. There's going to be a lot of changes to YouTube, particularly in January, so we want to be prepared for that. I think Jay's analysis can weather this storm, but basically what's going to happen is that the normal ad revenue is going to kind of go away. Because they're going to implement changes that have to do with child protection laws in the FTC, and this is going to affect a lot of gaming channels, but they're going to kind of force everybody who has a YouTube channel, I think, January, to choose whether their content is for kids or not. And if it's not, then the demonetization is going to be a lot more severe. So it's not going to hurt super chats, I don't think, at this point, which is... we do well with that here, and it's not going to hurt channel subscriptions. So if you want to support Jay's analysis on YouTube, you can join the channel subscription button there, and that lets you get access to the Jay's analysis material. And I don't think it's going to affect super chats as of yet. So those are the two ways that you can continue on YouTube to support. But the viewership and the memberships, or not memberships, but the new subscribers to Jay's analysis, just following the channel, this has affected everybody. So in the last 2 weeks, what they've done with the sub button, this has affected everybody. So there's a lot of big changes coming, and I think a lot of people's subscribers are down or flattened out for the last 2 weeks. I don't think, hopefully that's not going to continue for forever. But there's big changes coming to YouTube, and it's affecting, channels that, if this is part of how you make a living. So hopefully we can weather the storm in terms of the channel memberships where you can join, or you can always subscribe at Jay's Analysis to support Jay's Analysis, or you can hit us up with Super Chats. Anyway, so I needed to make that clear because I've been researching that today. So, excuse me. So today we're going to be talking about issues in France, French Jesuits, the Frankish Church. Let's start with the issue that you want to start with. So you tell me where you think is the best place to start, because we've talked a lot about Jesuits, the counter-reformation, prelest when it comes to weird mortification practices, the Jesuit usage of heart worship, Guettée's works that apparently have not been translated into English about the Jesuits. What's the best place to start in your mind?
The best place to start is, thinking about the, in the French context, what France really is, because we have a lot of people thinking it's a bastion of Catholicism.
Right.
But we need to think, look historically, and then I'll go on to Guettée, because he's probably one of the best sources we have, and it needs to be vindicated because a lot of people are just not accepting it because he converted. But I'll touch on that. So basically, what I want to go on first is the fact that France is actually France started as something very orthodox, and papism in France, especially after Vatican I, France always has been pushing against it, and really we should not see France as this bastion of Catholicism. And actually the fact that the SSPX and stuff like this are very present in France is more of a side effect of this, because the whole religious climate was just destroyed after Vatican I. So basically the idea is that when we look at the history of France, the first king who converted, like the French Constantine, if you want, French King Constantine, was actually Clovis. And Clovis, at the very start, so he was Frank, and the Franks was the only church that converted to Christianity, the United Church and divided church, which we know is Orthodox. And as soon as he did this, as soon as he converted, he convoked councils, namely the Council of Orleans. And the Council of Orleans establishes what is basically autocephaly in the kingdom of the Franks. So already we can see that.
Can you spell this for us, because you're saying it really fast? The Council of what?
The Council of Orleans.
Orleans. Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So that's in 511.
Okay.
And during this council, there's basically the establishment of autocephaly in France. And even after the schism, we can see that this idea of France getting centralized, especially after the 100 Years' Wars, France being centralized also involved, centralization of the church, and the idea that the church was not just a political tool for the Vatican. And we'll see it especially through the Jesuit infiltration, because they came a little late. And we can see that, in all traditional Christianity, there always were a fight against such influences. So, yes, basically, the church that existed in France was the Gallican Church. The Gallican Church, the concept of it is very easy. It really looks like the Anglicans, except they're in communion with Rome. And so the Gallican Church says that the lieutenant of Christ is actually the King of France.
The what of Christ?
And here we can see the lieutenant, like vicar, if you will.
Vicar?
Lieutenant.
Lieutenant?
Yeah, vicar, lieutenant.
Okay.
Yeah. And just this, it already invalidates most of the papal claims to France, because this already is at odds with Vatican I, saying that there is a universal jurisdiction, that the Pope is believed to have absolute power. And, it showed even during the First Council of Vatican. During the First Council of Vatican, there was a huge French opposition, the Gallican Church. Mm-hmm. And the Gallican Church actually... the only reason one of the most clear reason the Vatican could actually push ultra-papism, like after Vatican I, was the fact that there was the Franco-Prussian War. Basically, the emperor was captured, and the old state machine just fell apart.
Okay, so let's take this slow. Let's not go too fast. So, basically, what we're saying is that in this early period, when you have the expansion of Christianity into this region, it's essentially Orthodox. We think of this as the Gallican Church, and you're saying that the granting of autocephaly here, of being self-governing, more or less shows that the praxis of the church in this period is Orthodox church governance, and we don't see the Vatican I conception here. And this is why this has been a problem for the claims of Vatican I, correct?
Yeah, correct.
Okay, so that's our first argument. And what I want to get to then is when we move towards the period of Charlemagne, can you enlighten us how, before we jump to Vatican, we see that this is a problem of Vatican I, but can you take us through the Charlemagne period, just because my understanding is that I'm not agreeing with everything that Romanides or any of those people say, but there is a point to be made here that a lot of Greek writers have made about the history of the Frankish Church, which is that it does eventually become a tool for the Frankish power. And that's where we do start to see problems with Charlemagne, and it's actually the letters of St. Photios the Great where he complains about Frankish missionaries, and he does mean people under Charlemagne. He's not using the generic term of Franks for the Westerns. He's specifically speaking of people from the Franks spreading the Filioque, missionaries spreading the Filioque in the jurisdictions of Greek churches. So is that correct, and can you verify that, or do you want to get into that period next?
Yes. Yes, that's correct. So basically, what the Franks did, and it started with Pepin. It started with Pepin the Great, which is a father of Charlemagne. They started to see. So of course they established autocephaly because like Franks means free and so on. So this was starting at Clovis, so that's a little bit before. But starting at Charlemagne, we start to see a shift, and this shift is about seeing the papacy as a tool. So it started with the donation of Pepin, and then the coronation of Charlemagne. So the donation of Pepin is the moment where the papacy became the theocracy, the moment where powers are mixed between temporal and spiritual powers. And yes, Charlemagne then used the church as a tool, and he tried to prop up the Vatican as being more powerful and more important than it was, especially after the time of the Pentarchy.
I want to add too that I've added this link in the chat. That's the link to the classic article by Father Dionysios Dragas, which quotes the letters of Photius talking about the spread of the Filioque by Frankish missionaries. And everybody who's interested in these topics should be aware of this issue. Hold on one second here. So let's be clear about this quote. It's very important. It's about the middle of the doctrine, of the essay. It says, Photius knew, of course, that the Roman Church had not approved of the Frankish Filioque, but Frankish missionaries had been sent into Bulgaria. And so this is the central, all these stupid pop-ups in this old-ass GeoCities website. So let me put that quote, unless it's not going to let me. It's not going to let me. Yeah, it is. Here we go. Let me add this quote to the chat here so that you know this is legit, because this always comes up in debates and people always have a problem with this. Actually, I don't think I can fit this whole quote in the chat, so let me just screenshot this for everybody. Anyway, so I apologize for interrupting you there, but I want to let you continue then. So we've got the attempted to utilize the church in a political sense under Charlemagne. So there is something to the critique of the Frankish power. Let's be clear about this quote. Here it is. Meyer published a study of the Photian Council of 879-880, putting forward the thesis that the title of the book was a successful Council of Union. In this study, it concluded that a restoration of union was needed for the Convocation Synod of 879-80. More specifically, it celebrated peace once more in the Church of God. But he went on to explain the basis of this unity was theological. In his own words, this unity meant, first of all, unity in the same faith. Photius was a strong defender of the purity of doctrine. Indeed, where Orthodoxy was concerned, Photius was the true spokesman of the Byzantine bishops. Meyer goes on, this is a Roman Catholic writer. The West was also attached to the great value of the purity of faith, but in fact concentrated more on the question of devotion to the See of Rome. That was a big shocker, right? The Synod of 879-80, the Fathers' care for the purity of doctrine emerged in the Horos, the formula of that synod, which they proclaimed. This Horos cannot be understood as a dogmatic definition, but rather, this is quoting the Roman Catholic Guide, but rather as a true expression of the ecclesiastical feeling of the synod, it expressed by the conciliar usage of the creed of the Niceno-Constantinopolitan production. There is no, in other words, the one that was produced at Niceno-Constantinople, not the Nicene Creed without the Filioque is what we're talking about here. There's no doubt that Photius opposed the addition of the Filioque to the creed on dogmatic grounds. It is in his famous encyclical to the Oriental Patriarchs that he complained about the addition by the Frankish missionaries working in Bulgaria because he considered it theologically unacceptable. His whole argument is based on the conviction that the addition undermined the unity of God. Exactly. If you read the Mystagogy, this is still correct. We find, by St. Photius, we find that the same reasoning in his Mystagogia, as, here he goes, in his letter to the Archbishop of Aquileia. Photius knew that the Roman Church had not approved of the Frankish Filioque. So this is still in the period when it's not yet a normative dogmatic issue in the West. It does eventually become a normative dogmatic issue, and it's later that we see the theology clarified, especially at the Synod of Blachernae, which codifies the Orthodox conception in consistent harmony with the 6th and 7th councils in terms of the Christology and the iconography. This is where we get the essence energy distinction. This is where we get uncreated energies in Christ. That's what's continued into our synods, and then the Roman Catholic Church goes its way. Anyway, I wanted to make that clear. So let's move on to the next section. What do you have next for us in the history of the Frankish Church?
Oh, well, so basically, yes. As Orthodox, we should just see that it started out well. It was the only tribe that converted to Orthodoxy. But after Charlemagne, there's a real shift. He basically uses the Visigothic system, and of course the Visigoths were being in Spain. They had things from the Toledo Council, including the Filioque. So at this point, it's heretical. And then we start to see the shift into the post-schism. So basically, the Frankish Church was always pushing. It was always a pushing for more papacy. It was very involved in the Crusades, things like this. You have also all the strange devotion starting popping up with the Franks. You had live on this. We're gonna talk about this a little bit later when we talk about the actual devotions. And with this, we start to see, at this point, the Frankish Empire was sort of dismantled, and you start to see basically the two rivals.
Which period is this? Which time period are we talking about?
Okay, we're talking about High Middle Ages. High Middle Ages.
High Middle Ages. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so you will have one center that will be the Holy Roman Empire, Germany, and another one which is a remnant of East Francia, which became France. And Germany went the road of more feudalism, more decentralization over time, and France went to the road of centralization because feudalism failed very early, with the 100 Years' War and so on. And what we see is a consolidation of the power of the king, and the continuation of this idea of French de facto autocephaly. And whereas the king of the Germans, Henry IV, was being called, humiliated by the Pope, at Canossa, So basically, the Pope said that no, you cannot choose your bishops. I will excommunicate you, and excommunication then would be civil war, especially in a very decentralized state.
So the investiture controversy, where the Pope will now decide the selection of bishops, and this is not going to be in any way connected to the idea of the king, correct?
Yeah, basically the idea is that France went the other way. Like we see kings, for example, we see kings from the Valois dynasty already starting to
say that again and say it a little bit slower. What?
You will see kings like Philippe le Bel and the Valois dynasty already starting to want more centralization, and they do not want to be controlled by the Pope, even if it means refusing imperial titles. And that's when you will have, for example, incidents with the papacy. There was a king of France who basically sent a commander to attack a pope, to capture a pope.
Mm-hmm.
I think this was led by a Chevalier de Nogaret. Yeah, you will have this idea of more centralization, and you will have a strong state institution that are here to control theology. And the University of Paris was exactly that.
So I'm sorry, I'm still confused. So you're saying that the French state power, which is embodied still in Gallicanism, departs from the Pope by wanting to continue to have the control of who's the bishops, right?
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
And you can see it also through the Avignon papacy and so on. So
this is why there's the Avignon papacy. Okay.
Yeah. This is this idea, typical to France. So whereas Germany was being ruptured by this, France tried to centralize with a compromise. Like it's Catholicism, but it's the state still. And that's where you can see that even when French was nominally Catholic, they were fighting against papal primacy and exclusive powers to the Pope. And you can see it in Gallicanism later on, and you can see it in their combat against the Jesuits, because the Jesuits were a papal tool that tried to infiltrate France, and France actually fought back.
I see. So the idea here is that this is why the Jesuits become a tool of the papal power to go into, to basically subvert the French state power, to bring it back under, or to bring it under the full jurisdiction of the papacy, correct?
Yeah. Okay. And that's what we'll see, and it culminates, in this Gallican crisis, not Vatican I.
I see. Gotcha. So, does this fit into the Council of Vienne and the Frankish throne and the Templars? Does that play into this?
The Templar are a very complicated matter, because they used to be very prevalent in France, but there used to be, this was with Philippe le Bel. There was an agreement between the Pope and the King to push them out and basically take their riches.
Right.
So I believe the Pope was from the Avignon papacy, this one in particular. If I remember well, I might be wrong.
Okay, yeah, I'm not trying to get too sidetracked about Templar conspiracies. I'm just remembering that there were complaints about the fact that the Frankish throne wanted. There was a part of the Council of Vienne controversy relates to the Frankish power versus the papacy. That's part of the problem.
It's exactly this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So where do you want to take us next? So where do we want to go into the next period?
The next period historically will be the end of Gallicanism, and will be who I will use as a basis with Guettée, because I'll primarily use his sources.
Okay, and this is Abbé Guettée, who Vladimir Guettée, who was a convert to Orthodoxy eventually. So if you don't know about Guettée, He wrote a really good book on the papacy called The Papacy. You can get this on Amazon. I recommend it. It's one of the good books to read as a critique of the papacy. A famous convert here. So tell us about this. And you've been saying that there's also a book that he's written on Jesuits that we don't think is in English, right?
Yeah, I don't think it's available in English. And he wrote his master magnum opus was a history of the church. So basically, Guettée was part of this French Gallican church, and he had the approval of the French church. He had the approval of the king, and he was mandated to, as an historian as well, write about the history of the Frankish Church and the history of the church in general. And what's very funny is that his 4 first tomes of the history of the church got accepted by the Vatican, and after they get put into the index. So whenever people tell you that Guettée, was not, that he was biased, that he was anti-papacy and stuff like this, you need to remember that the papacy actually accepted several of his books, and he continued his work. He got put into the index, and then this crisis happened, like the Vatican I crisis. So basically, it was.
So the papacy itself appreciated his research and scholarship until the time of Vatican I. Basically, is what you're saying.
Until he stepped too far into history, and he actually writes this in his book. He said that I was put into the index for the papacy claims that I'm being too partial. I was put into the index for not being honest officially, and he said that I was too light on the papacy with all this. And yes, Guettée eventually became Orthodox with his historical knowledge.
Hold on. What do you mean he was too light on the papacy?
He considered himself, to have not gone far enough.
But the papacy said it was too far, but he said I didn't go far enough.
Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, after this crisis, he went back and with many old Catholics, he had correspondence with all this, and basically you need to understand that Vatican I, was supposed to be like the cry of glory of the papacy. It was more of a last breath, because it basically destroyed a lot of traditional Catholicism.
What was the last breath? Vatican I itself was, you mean?
Yeah, because it set them on the course that destroyed a lot of the traditional understanding of.
I see. Didn't Dolinger have a good quote that somebody put in the Discord the other day, that something like, from now on, Roman Catholic apologetics will be nothing but trying to debate about the papacy? Wasn't that something?
Yeah. It's from the same book. I put it there. So Dolinger was basically the German equivalent, Ignaz von Dolinger of Guettée.
Wow.
And he became an Old Catholic, and Guettée became Orthodox. And Dolinger wrote extensively. He was also an historian. He was part of this Catholic historian, who rejected all this. He said, no, it doesn't match historically. And yeah, he wrote this quote. It's beautiful. He said that from now on, all the art of theology performed by a Roman Catholic theologian will be about determining which level of infallibility the Pope has in any statement. Yeah. And he compares it to the Oracle of Delphi. He said it's the Oracle of the Tiber. Yeah. Like you need something, you don't need to look at tradition, you just ask him and see what comes out. Yeah. So yes, this was this great shock in even traditional Catholicism in Europe. So what we need to understand is that Vatican I is actually is everything but traditional, and that's why you had most of the historians rejecting it. The papal lawyers were fine with it, of course. There are many falsified documents to use. Actually, Dolinger wrote extensively about the papist falsification. He tells you that basically you will have upwards of 10 layers for for a single quote of falsification. Anytime it mentions the Filioque, anytime it mentions primacy of Peter. So basically, it's unusable, and you can see it in the Patrologia Latinae.
Which is unusable? Which thing?
Basically, all the quotes. Roman Catholic will send you all the so-called patristic quotes and stuff like this.
Because it's layers of, including forgeries. There's layers of what, Jesuit interpolation. Is that what you're saying?
You will have the Dominicans. You will have the Jesuits.
Okay.
You will have, and sometimes it's shocking. Sometimes you will literally see that there will be a little annotation. It will say "editi." So this was edited, and you say the original said this, but it was changed to be correct to the doctrine. Just crazy, because it's literally admitting to interpolation. But sometimes you will compare the Greek and the Latin, and you will have a whole paragraph just appearing out of nowhere in the Latin edition that it's talking about the Filioque, for example. And sadly, when you look at Döllinger's work, he was a great Catholic historian. Most of the history we can get, most of the manuscripts we can get from the Vatican are heavily interpolated. Really, it's very difficult.
I see. And
so all this.
And you're saying that Guettée noticed this, or many French writers have noticed this? Who has kind of pinpointed the interpolations and this kind of stuff? Who's noticed this? I mean, I know you guys have.
Most of the old Catholics, you'll have a lot of people. But Guettée was really the foremost French authority on this. He was a great historian, and he saw the historical discrepancy. And then he looked back into Catholicism, and then he realized that, yes, of course, it was orthodoxy all along. This was the church described in Matthew 16:18. And then he looked back at his work, at this history of the church. He looked back at all this dogma history, and he wrote about it from the Orthodox perspective. And that's when it becomes all clear. And we have him to thank, because he pinpointed specific heresies. He pinpointed specific historical events that do not match up. And he pinpointed the heavy influence of the Jesuits. And right now, many texts are very difficult to find, but we can be glad, because he was an historian, he was accredited, he had the approval of the king, he had the approval, he had full access to the library of Blois, which was a huge Catholic library, and he could wrote us all this about the heresies, about the prelates' devotions, and about the heavy influence of the Jesuits.
Interesting.
So that's why I'm going to talk about this.
Okay, so what's next on your list?
I want to talk about the devotions, Okay. But the idea here was mainly to vindicate Guettée.
Okay,
really
let's do that. Ben, let me preface this by saying, so basically this relates to some of the criticisms that we've put out in the last several months, which is an old criticism that is that what we see in the manifestations of devotion between Orthodox theology and Roman Catholicism is very different. And there's a reason for that, particularly in the second millennium. The two churches go in different directions, and Orthodoxy, of course, makes a big point to stress that our experience of God, we think, is unified. We don't think that there's a different experience amongst, say, monastics in Greece, on Mount Athos, as opposed to the church fathers who had the experience of God in the desert, 1,700 years ago. The experience of the light of God, of Mount Tabor, all those types of things. Theosis as a process is unified. And that means we don't see the really weird, out there, fringe, crazy stuff. And this was something that really stuck out to me when I began to investigate Orthodoxy back in about 2007, when I was a hardcore trad Catholic. And I actually, to be honest, I had some issues with the weirdness of some of the so-called saints of Roman Catholicism, specifically the women, specifically the flights of emotion that they talk about, the stigmata, the sexual imagery, and a lot of those things. And what eventually became evident to me was the fact that, and this, I'm not saying this to distract from you, I want you to talk about your topics and the translations and all that, but one thing that stuck out is if you read Occult Renaissance Church of Rome, he points out the fact that in the Renaissance papacy, you had a lot of usage of nudes, a lot of usage of things that, like the goddess Isis being painted and used in one of the papal apartments or something like that. And this is very, especially Bernini. This is very prevalent after all this stuff is used in the Vatican. And to me, this always stuck out as a tremendous hypocrisy because of the trad obsession with mortal sins. And yet I can't go to the Vatican without having, tiny little peepees on Renaissance people sticking out everywhere and giant boobies of chunky women everywhere, butts everywhere. So, I mean, it's very absurd that this nude art is everywhere, but at the same time, we're told about this, absurd doctrine of mortal venial sins, which is not what First John is talking about. It's not a distinction between mortal and venial sins, by the way. Anyway, so that, with that in mind, that always stuck out to me as a problem, and so I think that Prelest is a much better example of explaining what's going on here. When we have Faustina Kowalska claiming that the host floats around the room to her, and Jesus told her personally, "You're my favorite of all the nuns. We're basically boyfriend, girlfriend." All this kind of absurdity, which is nowhere in Orthodox spirituality at all. And the fact that Roman Catholicism accepts Orthodox spirituality in terms of uniatism, which is just a plot, actually, to bring people back under the dominance of the Roman bishop, shows that there's not a unified experience of God in the Roman Catholic Church. You can't have this absurd sexual imagery and weird stuff being true and the stigmata being true at the same time as the stuff over here with, but we also accept Palomism, since we've made Palamos a saint in our uniate circles, and we now accept him. None of that makes any sense. It's all completely contradictory. And what it shows is that the evolution of dogma, the umbrella of Rome, is really just an umbrella of the power of the papacy. And we're seeing that unravel now. But so let's talk about those spiritual practices. I remember, it was Larcher. When I got a hold of, thank you to Father Moody for sending me the Larcher trilogy, where he talks about the healing of spiritual illnesses. And that, to me, really solidified the difference between the way that we view the body, the way that we view the practices of asceticism in the East. It's different than it is in the West. You're not flagellating yourself. You're not mortifying the body. The body is participating in theosis. And so the purpose of asceticism is completely different. So I'll let you have the floor now after my little rant.
Okay, yeah, correct. So I will first start by addressing something. A lot of people accuse us, of hitting low and criticizing saints and so on. We don't criticize a person. We just say that here's the devotions are not good. And yes, we need to point that out. And it's been done through the forms of meme and stuff like this, because not everybody can, go on theology debates, and at some point, people need to see. I believe people can, I'm not appealing to emotion here, but people can feel what's right, what's wrong, and here we're gonna express and discuss, the differences. But yes, I believe that this is a talking point. It's not hitting low. It's not slandering. It's talking about these practices which exist.
Did you say hitting low?
Yeah. Well,
okay, like a low blow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We've been criticized for this, but this is very interesting. And yes, first of all, we can see that Orthodox theology of the body, and this is not a book by Larcher. Larcher is just a great theologian. In his theology of the body, he just expresses the classic Orthodox point of view that we live in a fallen world, fallen nature, and our body is actually healed by the divinity. And we can see that it culminates in theosis. So theosis, healing people, and the light of Tabor. This is the ultimate mark of sanctity in Orthodox Church. Since there's a Father,
and that's unified across the board. We don't think it's different for anybody.
Yeah, and for example, we had a lot of Western saints like John Cassian, who actually was a Palamite, so to say. They are part of this tradition of hesychasm. And this view of sanctity. And what we can see in Rome, especially after the schism, is that it's totally reversed. We see the appearance of devotional hurting. It's not fasting. It's really hurting yourself, altering yourself. This is already going against canons. Canon 24 of Saint Basil, if I remember well, forbids self-harm. It basically says that it's on the same level as killing. You cannot hurt your flesh because your flesh participates of this. That's linked to many things, or we are buried, the belief in reincarnation and so on. And we see not only people like flagellants, people that start to hurt themselves, to want to experience pain, but we also see marks of sanctity that are alterations of the body and that are painful, and we know that pain comes from the fall. It's not divine. It's not coming back to the original Adamic state. It's not, the pain is a result of the fall. You cannot be divinized into a result of the fall. And that's exactly what the stigmata is. And if you look at it, for example, the ones of Padre Pio, very noticeable. They look purulent,
They look what?
Some people purulent, like basically, some people even compared it to, like, he says it looks like herpes, or it looks like a grievous wound, and it actually hurt. And this is a complete, it's a complete inversion. And even if we look at earlier Catholic saints, they were associated, with more traditional miracles, healing. For example, I live in Alsace.
Well, this is a great point. Yeah, we know that there's gifts of healing according to St. Paul, and there have been many healers. And then suddenly, though, in the Middle Ages, after we get this schism, the Roman Catholic Church begins to develop these very bizarre practices that, this is a great point, that seem to be obsessed with paying debts through pain. And I think we have to mention indulgences and the paying of debts, too, because that's a big part of it. Even though the official Roman Catholic theology might not ultimately condone that, although indulgences are a false doctrine, the idea is still there that you're kind of paying for things, paying for temporal punishments.
Yeah, it's 100% penal substitution theology. So yes, you have these marks appearing, and that's a total inversion, and that's very weird, to say the least. And we're going to address some of the most famous one. For example, Francis Assisi. And Francis Assisi, we have Father Seraphim Rose, who actually wrote about this, and he said it can well be prelates, it can be fake, but he believed that there was some idea of it being psychosomatic, and this is very much linked to, and we're going to talk about the Jesuits now, very much linked to the introduction by many Jesuits of the idea of emotionality in the cult. So before, the cult was removing your emotions, removing these things, and being ascended through the removal of emotions. Saint John Cassian called all these emotions spirits, like they were little demons, like a whole set of little demons that can pull you down.
Yeah, this is very key. I want to stress this. This is something that is in the debate between the Barlaymite and Palamas. He talks about this very point where he says that the passions are not inherently evil in themselves per se, but what happens is that when we follow them in an inordinate way, it becomes demonic. And so what happens in asceticism, and the whole purpose of asceticism is self-control, so that we can achieve a state where we're not dominated by our passions. That's the whole point of this. And what you get here in this stuff is the inversion of that, and the man's psychology becomes inverted, and it becomes obsessed upon this sort of punishment of the body, and the whereas you have a harmony between man's faculties in the process of theosis, this gets inverted, and you get the dominance of emotionalism. And that's what's so key to here, especially in these weird women saints who think that Jesus is saying that they're boyfriend, girlfriend stuff.
Yeah, I'm going to come to that because women were a prime target, especially for Jesuits. So yes, basically, we have the introduction of emotionality. And the Jesuits are a big part of this. And for example, St. Francis Assisi and people like this, they started to picture themselves being crucified, taking the place of Christ. And that's why that's what Father Seraphim Rose theorizes, that basically they would it would be psychosomatic wounds, because they will have intense emotion in them all the time, and that at some point the body will just accept, okay, I have nails in the hands.
Yeah,
yes.
and even though that Filipino practice of doing this to yourself and doing this on Good Friday is supposedly officially condemned. The point is that you're seeing these manifestations. I'm not saying that the whole church is false because people who are villagers do these things that are not condoned. I mean, that happens in any religion. But what I'm saying is that these manifestations are happening because there actually is an erroneous anthropology and an erroneous doctrine of how to heal mankind in the Roman Catholic scheme.
Yeah, correct. And you have this idea of, the fact that there is no more exclusivity. And this is probably because of Nestorianism. Because
there is no more what? Say that again?
Exclusivity.
Oh, exclusivity in what sense?
There's no more, for example, exclusivity of Christ as being divinized, because that's when you see a lot of prophecies being shifted from Christ to the Theotokos.
I see what you're saying. So basically, everybody becomes a kind of Christ who can participate as a sacrifice, is what you're saying.
Exactly. And that's what, for example, if you look at what Loyola wrote, so the first Jesuit, the guy who founded the Jesuits, it's exactly this. He believes that he lived daily, physically with Christ around. He believes that he was anointed by the Father, and the term used is associated with the Son, and that's why they took the name Societa Jesu, the company of Christ, of Jesus, and they really were into this Nestorianism, and we can see it at every step of the dogma.
Oh wow, this is key. This is key. Let's highlight this. So you're saying that there is an implicit sort of lurking Nestorianism in this idea that there's not one sole Son of God who's the divine person of the Logos who took on human nature, who's inhypostatized. There's now the possibility in this mystical union of anybody becoming a participant and their own kind of little savior in this process of the crucifixion in their own life. And that's why everybody kind of takes it upon themselves to sort of induce a kind of self-sacrifice almost. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
And that would be Nestorian, absolutely.
Not only that, you mentioned a lot of women saints who thought that basically Jesus was a girlfriend, boyfriend, well, whatever. Because of this removes, the idea of mystical marriage, and this was pointed out, with the Teresa of Avila, the women who got Catherine of Siena, Alacoque, which is really the worst offender here. People who get like foreskin rings as a wedding gift. People who believe that there is a marriage to be arranged personally between them and Christ. This is corrupting the idea of the mystical marriage of the Church to Christ into an exclusive personal marriage between one nun and Christ.
Oh, yes.
Same thing. So this is this.
So the error of Nestorianism and Christology, the same kind of error that would apply to the Theotokos, it's being transferred over to the error in ecclesiology, that there's one mystical body of Christ, which is the whole church, is now being transferred over into the mystical experiences of the individual saints. And it's being, what's the word I'm looking for? It's overly sensual, and it becomes this kind of weird sexualized thing.
Yeah, and I'm going to come to the sexualized thing. So basically, what we see, okay, I'm going to take writings by French priests around the time the Jesuits started to pour in. Okay, this was after. I'll probably talk about the Council of Trent first. So before we talk about all this, I know that there will be people who will start to say that you'll have you can be a Catholic and not be Jesuit. You can do all this and not be Jesuit. You don't have to accept it. It's just one company. It goes further than that, and we're gonna go a bit later on. We're gonna go a bit further later on with the implication of the Jesuit, everything they did, how powerful they are. But they are a key in Catholicism because the leader of the Council of Trent was a Jesuit. It was the general of the Jesuit, Laelius. And this council is a basis of Roman Catholic dogma. So you can't really dodge it, and it's at this point that they refuse the idea of a traditional consulerism. And they have quotes during this Council of Trent, where basically this man Laelius says that, the church, I'm paraphrasing here, of course, before anybody says I'm not translating well enough. You have people who want to come back to the Church of the Apostle, but there is a time and there is a need. That's what he said. So basically, they acknowledge the fact that they were not following the traditional organization of the church, and in the same council they declared that the church is the slave to the Pope, that the church, that all the bishops are servants to the Pope, which was not the case before. So,
yeah, by the way, just on a little side note, isn't it Catherine of Siena who says something like, even if the Pope is the devil, we must obey him?
I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's Catherine of Siena who has a famous quote about that even if the Pope were Satan and he were to come to you, it's your duty to submit to the Pope even if he's Satan. Pretty funny quote. I mean, I know that's not Catholic dogma. I just wanted to throw that one in there. But yeah, so this is good. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and that's when you see that they start to infiltrate a lot. So I will go on the politics side a little bit later. We're going to focus on the weird devotions a bit more. And I'm going to quote this French priest who actually writes about the Jesuits and the infiltration, most notably in the University of Paris. And he criticizes that doctrine.
Hold on one second before you quote that. I just want to let you know I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to step away just to pour more coffee. So you do your quote and don't pay any attention to the fact that I'm stepping away. I'm still here.
You don't need to hear that.
Huh?
Okay, let's go.
Well, no, but if I step away, some people, if you see me step away, people get distracted and they think I'm leaving or something. But So go ahead and read your quote because everybody's seeing the picture of Teresa right now.
Okay, so he starts by criticizing their doctrine, and then he says they are spreading into the people, especially among the women, catechism, which is filled with some superstition that are here to enslave their mind. So here you can see that they already saw the primary target, and they already saw that through removing the exclusivity and through putting a lot of emotionality, they had prime targets in women. And that's when you see a lot of stigmata appearing, all these weird devotions appearing. And yeah, some of them were clearly Nestorian, and we're going to talk a little bit about Saint Mary Margaret Alacoque.
Okay, yeah, this is a great point too, because we want to keep the Nestorianism in mind because it's going to be relevant when we get to the issue of a Sacred Heart, because the heart worship and the Sacred Heart stuff is a manifestation of what's explicitly condemned as Nestorian by the Council of Ephesus. So anyway, go ahead.
So yeah, I'm going to read what's not read, but I'm going to tell what's written, especially about Mary Margaret Alacoque in Guettee's book. And Guettee had access to the original, and the guy who wrote it was a father Jesuit, and he was sainted, canonized, simply because he wrote this. I've been contradicted, some people try to.
Before we go into that, because there may be a lot of people in the chat who aren't familiar with this story, she's the one who claims that Jesus carved out her heart and put his heart in her, right?
Yeah. So basically, all this is, it's serious information. I've been called many things for putting this forward, but if you look at Catholic apologetic website, they all contradict themselves. There's no primary sources, yet there is the closest thing we can get to the primary sources. And it tells us that some of the weird stuff might be in the future destroyed by the Jesuits regarding their method. So yes, this woman thought she had a special relationship with Christ. She saw him appear to her at night in a room. A lot of the time they would say they discuss a lot of things. And here comes a weird devotion, the devotion that involved blood, and that involved, the reviving of old Frankish methods to just control the French population better.
So hold on. Be real clear and elaborate that point. Why is this a reference to the old French mythos?
So you talk about this on the previous slide, basically Frankish
Heart worship, right? Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they would have the heart worship, and they would have a lot of bloody worship. They would have vials of blood of the saints. They believe the blood, some particularities. The Franks, they believe they were a different race almost at times, and they will have a lot of focus on blood. And the Jesuits will use that, and that's what this French priest he said, that they are reviving superstitions.
So the Jesuits are capitalizing on the superstition and basically kind of targeting women for this. That's what's key here.
Yeah. And you see that she did a lot of crazy stuff. Like she claims that after each time they met, she would do bloodletting, which is also linked to the old Frankish tradition of do bloodletting of the meetings between lovers, if not sex. You will also have this tradition, of taking the organs, worshipping them, and that's the sacred heart. That's this. That she claims that Christ just pulled her heart out of her chest, and basically they switched. You will have her carving her breast, her chest.
Now, what would you say to somebody who says, just to play devil's advocate, I don't think this, but what would you say? That's just symbolic imagery. You're intentionally, misrepresenting our saints.
Well, I'm not, because all these things were put forward, also in the context of the counter-reformation, and this stuff, this physicality was here in clear opposition to, the more, the less. The new Protestant dogma. So they would do all they can to push the emotionalities. They will do all they can to push the physicalities. They will do all they can to push, Theotokos, because in order to antagonize a lot of Protestants. And for the longest time, this was believed to be true, to be actual miracles. And right now, you see a lot of modern Catholics taking the Protestant road, sadly, and starting to deny the miracles. If I were opposed this kind of criticism, I would say that if you start denying your miracles, when will you deny the transubstantiation in the Eucharist? Because these were believed to be miracles.
That's a good point, yeah. I mean, typically it's not interpreted as merely allegories or spiritual tales. I mean, they're interpreted to be real miracles, exactly. That's why they're saints. You can't be a saint in the Roman Catholic scheme unless you've, done the Vatican-approved miracles.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, when the stories about the Holy Heart were being translated into Italian, the Pope got his hand on it, and he immediately rejected it. He was theologically literate, and he rejected it. And what the Jesuit did was waiting for the next pope to come about, and they started to push it, and I think they pushed it 2 more times until the pope eventually gave in, and he said, okay, you can have this devotion, even if it was forbidden before, you can have it, but it needs to be the allegorical heart, so the love of Christ. But of course they didn't. They didn't care, and even when it was previously forbidden, they would go around and sell little medals, little books, and so on, to popularize the myth around this population. Maybe they didn't hear of papal infallibility at the time, but yeah. Basically, they would go behind the back of the Pope to further the dogma. And even though the Jesuits were usually allies of the Pope, they are here to further their own goals.
So they were utilizing the superstitions to further their plans, and even under papal suppression, they still continued to do this, is what you're saying. And we should make another point, too, that part of the reason for this being a problem is the Jesuit idea of enculturation. If you're not familiar, the Jesuit approach to missionary work was different than a lot of the other missionary approaches, both in the first millennium of the church and in other orders like the Dominicans. The Jesuits really pioneered the idea of enculturation, which was the idea that you kind of just utilize a lot of the ideas that are in the existing culture. Now, everybody who does missionary work to some degree does some kind of enculturation. I mean, Herman of Alaska did versions of this where he would find what was good in the Aleut culture and so forth. So it's not that the whole thing is wrong, and the whole history of the church's encounter with Hellenism for the first millennium and all the councils dealing with the Hellenic presuppositions, which the fathers are very clear that the Christological heresies are all built on Hellenic dialectical presupposition. So I'm not trying to oversimplify it, but there is an aspect to which the Jesuit approach was unique because they were the most extreme when it came to trying to meld the Christianity with the existing culture. And so they would be the most pioneering of ecumenism or of all these different weird practices. And that's why it gets into the weirdness in the period that you're talking about with the promotion of these devotions that would be in previous periods seen completely to be absurd. But in the Roman Catholic scheme, this is justified by the fact that theology is always developing. It's always growing. It's a seed that grows into a giant tree, and that therefore justifies all of the innovations after the first millennium.
Yeah, exactly. And we can go even a bit further, There's some more points I want to cover. So, there is this diversity of devotion. And basically everything, every ideology, every people, every group of people will get their own specific devotion, even if it doesn't make sense. So you will get Lord for the French, you will get Akita for the Japanese. All of them are devotion of the Theotokos. You will even have the Lady of all the Nations, which is a specific devotion of the Theotokos, which was invented after World War II to promote, peace in the world. So this is just, creating devotions to be interesting, to be relevant, to be hip. And again, there is this diversification, which is about, again, showing that there is no more exclusivity. The Theotokos is not only Theotokos, she's also here to protect Europe, the European Union. She's here to protect the Japanese specifically, the French specifically, some children, stuff like this. And you have this idea
so
of
she's
miracles.
being used as a geopolitical tool in much the same way as the Jesuits were utilizing a lot of these sort of superstitions as tools of their time.
Yeah, the Immaculate Conception, so Lord and stuff like this, it was pushed by the Jesuits, 100%. And same method as the Sacred Heart. There was a debate, and they pushed it, and they make it very popular. And the Pope was, a bit ants-tied at some point because you will lose a lot of people if they deny this. So yes, there is again.
And let's not forget that the pioneers and champions, along with the Royal Society, of both the Big Bang, Darwinian evolution, and the rejection of creation, and the patristic doctrine of creation, and the Six Councils' profession of faith about creation, has been none other than the Jesuits. I mean, I know that typically Teilhard de Chardin is cited as somebody, the Vatican censored him. Yeah, but now, since he was censored, the post-Vatican II popes have all made some very glowing, loving statements about the wonderful theology of Teilhard de Chardin. And what did I just post on the Twitter this week from Father Seraphim Rose in his magisterial book, Genesis, Creation, and Early Man, was the fact that Teilhard de Chardin claims that he became convinced of his evolutionary dogmas because he talked to the thing. I am not joking. He literally claims to have been walking in a desert talking to the thing, literal John Carpenter level theology, and the thing told him that everything is material evolutionary flux progressing towards the omega point, the noosphere, et cetera, et cetera. So here are the champions of the rejection of the doctrine of creation, none other than the Jesuits. And so I've really been struck this last week by the fact that, I knew this in the past because I've read 3 or 4 books on the Jesuits over the last 10 or 12 years. But it's really struck me how instrumental they've been in pushing fraud paleontology, particularly Teilhard, who was present at many of the paleontological frauds, Piltdown Man, this kind of stuff. They've been central in promoting Le Maître, the Big Bang, which is a secularized version. So the Jesuits are so interested in enculturation that they're even trying to water things down for all the atheists, right? And what we noticed this week as well was that the natural theology propositions and Aquinas' acceptance of death existing before the fall, it's only natural then that Humani Generis of Pope Pius XII would so easily accept theistic evolution. This is what natural theology is a big part of this, and natural theology is just part and parcel of this overall Nestorian doctrine that you're talking about, that the Jesuits are really pioneering here, because it's Nestorian because perennialism is Nestorian. In fact, you can go look up that perennialist James Custinger. He has a talk where he said that they ask him, why did you move away from orthodoxy towards perennialism? And he says, because Jesus is just an avatar of this overriding God that we can all experience and all be a part of. That's Nestorian. He literally says Jesus is a human person, and the Son of God is this mystical experience across all the religions. And that's why that's the secret, you could say, to Nestorianism, to all the Hermeticism. That's the secret to this garbage of Teilhard and the Jesuits, is this undergirding Nestorianism that you pointed out. This is devastating.
Yeah, there's also some healthy level of originism, the idea of Christ as returning as a spherical form.
Yeah, right. The body, it's not an actual body. It's the higher spherical form that we were all transformed into in the resurrection.
Yeah. I just wanted to cover one or two more topics, not directly linked to the Jesuits, and then we'll switch to the very political idea of the Jesuits.
Okay.
But when it comes to the theology of the body, we can also see discrepancies. So we talked about the stigmata. First of all, just a little food for thought. It is a painful mark that appeared mystically on people that made them recognizable, and it was after the schism. It sounds eerily similar to the mark of Cain, especially the fact that it's visible, painful, and things like this. Just food for thought. And I want to touch really quickly on the idea of incorruption, because the idea of incorruption is also different. It has been altered. And so incorruption basically is the idea that people that have been touched by the Spirit, saints, and people like this, their body will not corrupt, they will not decay as permanently or as fast. And this has been observed in Orthodoxy for quite a while. And what we can see is that the Catholic, especially the new saint, the very popular one, they are trying to cover it. So, for example, if you look at an Orthodox incorrupted saint, you will see, for example, Saint Spiridon. Saint Spiridon is currently residing on the island of Corfu. And so he was a father that participated at the Council of Nicaea. So that's very early. And he basically looks like a mummy, but he's still, supple, he's flexible. His skin doesn't break and things like this. It doesn't look pretty, but it's incorrupted. It's not, the flesh is not rotting and things like this. This is incorruption. Actually, you can go there some time of the year, and they will give you relics of him. They will just change his clothes and give you relics of him. I think my girlfriend even got one from there, which is very cool. That's another way to be connected, like pre-ethical we may. And in the meantime, you will see in the Catholic Church, for example, for the Lord revelation. So it was Bernadette Soubirous which saw a miracle that confirmed the dogma, which is also something very interesting, because miracles start to confirm dogma, starts to confirm that the Pope is right, which is very interesting. She was believed to be incorrupted, and they basically put a layer of wax on her face and claim, she's corrupted and things like this. And when they exhumed her, they realized that she wasn't. So they actually had to redo the wax thing, or actually they did it just after. But the idea is that there's not anymore this understanding of incorruption. Incorruption must be spotless. It must be perfection. It must be it must really imitate life. It's not showing something particular. It's aping it, and we can see it with Padre Pio as well. Padre Pio, he's got a very is animated in a church, and you can see it. It basically looks like Snow White. He's in a glass coffin, and in there, he's got a silicone mask on his face. So now there is this theology of the flesh, the body, the bloody devotion, pushed so far that the Roman Church cannot even
Snow White.
Yeah,
that's funny. He does look like Snow White. That's funny.
Yeah. So there is this idea of they can't accept incorruption, as they need to fake it, they need to cover it, to mask it, and of course it shows intent and things like this.
Now, this is kind of new to me because I never really paid attention to this aspect. I didn't go see Padre Pio or anything. Do Roman Catholics try to defend a silicone mask, or do they say it doesn't exist, or you're just making that up, or what's the usual response to this?
You will have a lot of responses. Basically, it's I don't know what the official stance is, but if it really was not a problem, why put a silicone mask on? You need. So you'll have a lot of people who say he's incorrupted. For example, with Bernadette Soubirous, they had to retract the claims of incorruption, I believe, because they realized she was not incorrupted. Even behind that wax.
Really?
So yes,
they retracted incorruptibility on Bernadette. I didn't. I'm not saying you're wrong. I just didn't know that.
I should look it further, but basically there were claims, and there were. It was confirmed that yes, her body did corrupt, and that's what you see. This whole theology of the body is a full inversion, and sometimes it's going the other way around. Sometimes it's pushing as far as possible, and we didn't have that in the West originally. I come from Alsace, and a very important saint there is Saint
Wait, hold
Odelia.
on. You come from where?
From basically a region of France, and
they
the
have
saints
what?
we have there, they were like Alsace. And
Alsace. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, and we had this saint, like for example, Saint Odelia. The first miracle was that she was born blind, and she was cured healed of blindness. It was all about healing. And then you can start to see things like this happening, new kind of miracles. There is this, still today, you will see people being very proud, like, the Eucharist bled.
Yeah.
Like, the Eucharist bled, and we have saint with blood that coagulates and decoagulates. And
well, it doesn't. Yeah. There's one of those where they actually claim that Jesus' blood, like it returns, and there was a priest who supposedly wrote a book because he did a DNA test on like he was going to find out Jesus' DNA from this.
Yeah, and they will claim, it's very old, that communion wafers, that it's been attested for a very long time, but we know that they didn't even use Azuma's bread until after all the claims.
That's a good point.
So yes, this fixation on blood, and I think ultimately, when you talk about Roman Catholic, and I will end on that, for the weird devotion, people can feel at some point, they can feel that, okay, we're not seeing the glory of God. We are praying to Mary more than anything else. We are not seeing him as glorious. We're seeing him as, in pain. There is statues with blood painting on it. The human aspect is very much brought forward because, of course, there is latent Nestorianism. Mm-hmm. It's a very mutagenic dogma, It can fly under the radar because, it's still Trinitarian. Christ is still God, but at the same time, it allows for a lot of personal stuff to go on.
Yeah, that's a great point. Ultimately, we want to highlight the Nestorian aspect to this, which is good. That's really good.
And I want to go further on the Nestorianism, and I'm going to start the part on the Jesuit purely. The Jesuits like to attribute, messianic prophecies to other people. Basically, everything about the rock in in the Old Testament would be about Peter all of a sudden.
Yeah, they're not fulfillments of Christ. Everything is about Peter, exactly.
Yeah, you will have the crushing the head of the snake, which is all about the Theotokos, not the Messiah. And they even start to attribute themselves as the Jesuits prophecies. For example, there's a prophecy of Isaiah, which says that I don't remember exactly, but it says something about being nurtured by the state and sucking on the breast of the Gentiles, the kingdoms and so on. And they said, yes, this isn't the book.
Yeah, I know the prophecy. I think it's Isaiah 42 or 45, and it talks about the conversion of kings to the church.
Yeah, and they basically claim that this prophecy applies to them as the Società Jesu by itself, because they had friends in high places, because they were helped by the friends. This is in the books that basically record the Jesuit history of the first century. They're talking about all this, so they start to attribute prophecies to the company itself, which is very interesting, and we can see that really quickly it became a church inside the church. And for example, you will have them come to the University of Paris, which I mentioned before, and several times they will go into trial, to claim. They basically claim university chairs, and the University of Paris was like, okay, we can do that, but you need to specify. What are you? Are you laity? Are you a monk? Are you a priest? What's going on here? And they played on this. They played on the fact that the Jesuits are organized. There is a solid core, and then there's everything that's gravitating around it. And they would actually use this status, in many of their operations, and that's how they will push people. They will push people in high places, and sometimes they did not even have sacerdotal charge. And we can see that there were papal bulls. So I'm gonna name the bulls. It's Regimini Militantis Ecclesiae, which is the first one, and Exposit Debitu. And these two bulls basically said that from now on, the Jesuits will have free reign. Whenever they come to a place, the bishops have to conform to them. They cannot be excommunicated. They need to be listened to when it comes to theology. They have the right to absolve people. So they have the sacerdotal charge, even when some of them are just laity. They are not priests. And you can see here one of the fulfillment of the Trullo Council. The Trullo Council forbids, congregations that are following specific rules, so orders of people. And
yes, and let's make that point. Let's make that point here. So Trullo, the Quinisex Council, is important because it was accepted at Nicaea too. So this is an earlier, almost ecumenical council that eventually does get and receives ratification at Nicaea too, the Seventh Ecumenical Council. And the Roman Catholics typically will admit that, but they'll just rebut by saying, oh, but the Pope, because of his supremacy, can go back through and pick out the 3 or 4 canons of Trullo that he doesn't like. And that's why they don't hold to this, because Trullo also says there should be married clergy. And the Roman Catholics respond by saying, well, yeah, but the Pope just decided that that's not true. So they're doing the same thing here with the religious orders. That's why there's not all these different crazy orders in Orthodoxy. There's no Franciscans and Carmelites and all that. There's just monastics or not.
Yeah. So basically Trullo shows that if you start to make orders with specific rules and people that are sworn to each other.
Yeah, it's like secret societies, basically.
It will end up in secret society. It basically said that since secret societies are a crime already, let's make things that become a secret society anathema. That's basically what's said. So they started to organize themselves, and they got a huge reach because they had very specific method. So first of all, they came about in a time where monastic orders were not doing so well. The Pope had finished his crusades against the mystics, and at the same time, you had counter-reformation coming in. So the Jesuits were very effective because they were organized as an army. Loyola used to be a military man. They took control of a lot of stuff. And for example, we have many instances of them antagonizing the Protestant population, even through dogma. The Council of Trent was led by the Jesuit, and there is all these things to push against the Protestant, to further the split between the Protestants and the Catholic. That's when you start to see like a lot of focus on the Theotokos, because the Protestant hated it and so on. It culminated in massacres. You have massacres, for example, in Portugal, where the Jesuit would just come in, antagonize the population, get pre-made absolution, and just lead mobs of people to kill Protestants. You have stuff like this in Poland. In Poland, there used to be Poland was very central in Europe. They were Catholic, but they were between the Protestant German states and between Orthodox, the Slavic Orthodox nations. And they had really great kings at some point who proclaimed religious freedom. I'm not saying Protestantism is cool. I'm not saying we should not fight against it in any capacity, especially from the Roman Catholic side of things. But we had this king who proclaimed religious freedom. And as soon as he died, the Jesuits started to push for, I think it was Henry III, so Duke of Anjou, and they excited him into just attacking and antagonizing Orthodox and Protestants. And that when you see, for example, the political path of Poland was sealed at this point, because they antagonized the Protestant and the Germans and the Orthodox and the Russians. And this nation later on was crushed several times between these two nations because of political actions like this. And even today, you will have a lot of trads claiming, Poland is this very rad thing. It's traditional Catholicism. Well, first of all, in the way they express their religiosity, it's kind of similar to Orthodoxy, because there's a Slavic component. Every Slav people are to some extent, the sons and daughters of Cyril and Methodius. And, Polish people should not be proud of this, because this actually destroys their country 2 times. They actually had some good things going on before, in terms of religious tolerance. Yeah, it was even famously the only country which did nothing against the Jews. So the main idea is that anywhere the Jesuit would come, it would be a mess. And just a second. Please.
Well, this is interesting because this completely flips, by the time of the 20th century with John Courtney Murray and the Jesuits that were very influential at Vatican II. Even the fake trad like Malachi Martin he details all this at Vatican II and the different periti that were consulting at Vatican II. Malachi Martin was a consultant with Cardinal Bay, and then we have John Courtney Murray being the champion of religious liberty and the idea of removing the notion of a confessional state. That was what he was the point man for that. He's even being lauded, as you can see here it's always backwards in America Magazine, as the champion of religious freedom. And this is why I have to stress one of the most important books, if you want to understand traditional Catholicism, Vatican II, and understanding it from the Jesuit and the geopolitical angle, is the David Wimhoff book, John Courtney Murray, Time, Life, and the American Proposition. Now, I know this book is a little expensive, but it's actually worth having because it shows the CIA's doctrinal warfare program is where they allied with the Jesuits to steer the Roman Catholic Church, particularly at the time of Vatican II and after Vatican II, into being a tool of the Cold War to promote Americanism. So to promote Americanism, they needed a front of people within Roman Catholicism who were willing to to go against the idea of a confessional state, to champion religious liberty and freedom, which is ironic because this sounds very contrary to previous Vatican Jesuit machinations, and it is ironic, and that's because, and one can debate the whole meaning of the Jesuits over the centuries, but regardless, in the 20th century they become the leaders of the revolution within the Roman Catholic sphere. And there's many reasons for that. There's older reasons that you've been pointing out that deal with kind of the implicit heresies and the implicit Nestorianism and enculturation that's present amongst the Jesuits. But at least in the 20th century, what Wim Hof has documented in his book, and this is 800 pages, 1,000 plus footnotes, as a traditional Catholic himself, he's documented the fact that this is quite literally a known CIA program. And the CIA program was successful in turning the Roman Catholic Church into a branch and arm of Americanism. And the Jesuits were at the forefront of that. That's very important to understand. So, and by the way, I'm not saying that the Jesuits run the world. This is not a book that's like kooky level conspiracy stuff. This is like actual intelligence level research stuff here. That's what Wim Hof's book is. Okay, it's nothing to do with black assassins of the underground layers of the Vatican. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about real, legit, hardcore documentation written by, I believe Wim Hof is a lawyer, so he's obsessively documented this with like 1,000 footnotes. And it's a really solid piece of research. It's a huge key to understanding the 20th century and Vatican II. And this is somebody coming from somebody who used to be a traditional Catholic, who spent many years in that world devouring traditional Catholic books, from the SSPX to the FSSP to Michael Davies to the Sedas to all those. I just devoured all that stuff for many, many years. I've even read the liberals like Xavier Wren, Paul Blanchard. I've read them all. And this is the best book to understand the geopolitical ramifications of Vatican II and the relationship to the Jesuits.
Yeah, and actually, I focus on the more ruthless, ways to gain power in Europe, because it is true, sometimes they will even claim in their oath that to be able to be kingmakers, and they were in the past. But you see that this idea of adapting to culture, it has been promoted especially during the colonization era, because they were very important in terms of colonization. And you will have records of them going to the Indians, starting to play dress up as Indians. You will have...
who's the one that went to the Japanese? Remember him? He's well known for this, like the Japanese Jesuit guy, and he's all dressed out like he's a freaking samurai. It's pretty funny.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't know the specific Jesuit, but the Jesuits are very famous, in Japan, or infamous, because during the period of civil war, the Sengoku Jidai, there will be an influence, and they will act as spies. Basically they will travel with the merchants.
This is an important point. Thank you. Yes, they were the essentially functioned in part as spies for the Vatican. This is a key point.
Yeah, and they would work with, they would go on with the merchants and things like this, and you even see them engaging in industrial espionage, for example. They would try to take away the competitive advantage of Chinese people and Japanese people by stealing secrets of Chinaware, how to make Chinaware. And they will actually, inform, the army. They will inform the Pope. And Japan was a very particular case, because during the Edo period, in the Sengoku Jidai, there was this fight against this Western influence. And after the Edo period closed, the Edo period started. So after this huge island-wide civil war, there will be bans on Christianity, specifically because they were seen as a bad influence. And even with that, the de facto leader of Japan at the time, Tokugawa Ieyasu, he basically, whenever he learned that there were Christians that were not Catholics or Jesuits, he would want to have them at the court. And you have the famous history of William Adams. William Adams was a British guy, and as soon as Tokugawa Ieyasu found that there were Christians which were not Jesuits, which were not this a wrong influence on Japan, he would actually try to bring them in. And William Adams actually, well, he didn't promote Christianity, of course, but William Adams, for example, was given the title of samurai, and he could stay at the imperial court, or the court of the.
Is this the basis of that goofy Tom Cruise movie? Is that what? Remember that?
Because that will be during the Boshin War, so that's later. But basically, there was a British samurai, and the only commerce that was done with the Europeans will be through Protestant Dutch at the time. So basically, the over-influence of the Jesuits just caused a lot of massacres of Christians in Japan, even the converts. There was this movie, Silence. Maybe you've seen it. It talked basically about this, about the persecution of Christians in Japan, and it's following Jesuit missionaries who come even though the country is closed down.
Oh, Silence. No. I'm sorry. I get that mixed up with the one with The Mission with Robert De Niro from like 10 years earlier. But no, I'm not. I know what you're talking about, but I haven't seen Silence.
Oh yeah, you should, because well, I'm not gonna spoil it then, but he's acting like a douchebag. Yeah, you'll see the difference between when the Japanese people, the Christian converts, have to show faith and prepare for martyrdom, whereas where he has to face it. I'm pretty sure that would be a good movie review.
Yeah, so, that's a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah. Right on the theme, Jesuits, foreign influence. And yeah, so basically you have all this, there's a variety method. You will have them involved in evangelization of many places, in the Caribbean you start to see voodoo, because there is this lenience around the, I think it's like Lady of Guadalupe. This is, again, it's a miracle that just tailored, to get things working politically. As Our Lady of Guadalupe was basically the idea that, there's been the apparition of an icon of the Theotokos, but she was looking like the Aztec people. And basically a lot of the feminine sacerdotal class adopted it there. And today you can still see in Mexico there's like Santa Muerte and things
like
this.
This is another point too. This is why Orthodox iconography never pictures Chinese Jesus, black Jesus, because it's very important that Jesus be the Hebrew Jesus that he was, to fulfill the prophecy to be a descendant of David. So you can't do Chinese Jesus. Jesus wasn't Chinese, and that's why all the Orthodox iconographical presentations of the saints always retain their historic qualities, because we're not Gnostics. Your lineage and your people group is important, because as we see in the Apocalypse, it's people out of every tribe, tongue, and nation that are called, and you don't lose all of your historic physical qualities in the resurrection. That's a Gnostic doctrine, and that's why you can't. Well, this again speaks to the Nestorianism, right? Because if there can be Chinese Jesus, then Jesus' historical instantiation as the Word of God, in a single and hypostatized historical instantiation, is relativized.
Yeah, and again, you got this idea of non-exclusivity and diversification of devotion. Like every little people needs to have this thing. You've got, this is ad hoc miracles. Oh yeah, right now we've got a lady for the Aztecs. Oh, good. And it's the end of World War II. We've got a lady for the peace in the world. Like really, we will have our mother of soy soon enough. Just give it a few years.
Our mother of soy? Is that what you said?
Devotion of soy and stuff like that. Like Our Lady of the New World Order.
Oh, right. Yeah, and you'll notice. So notice here that in the typical iconography of Christ, you'll see that the ho on, that's these Greek letters are in the halo. Those are actually in the Byzantine iconography. They're references to the I am. And this is a statement that the same divine person who said I am that I am is who is the single divine person present here that you see. There's no created human hypostasis present. Christ has a fully human nature, but the human nature has for its hypostasis the divine person of the Word alone. That's it. So that's why we are so stringent to avoid Nestorianism, is because we want to avoid all these errors. And that's why Orthodox iconography always pictures Christ the same. You don't see an icon in Orthodoxy. Maybe in weird Roman Catholic stuff, they'll make a Chinese Jesus or something. But you will always see Christ in having these features. There might be a little variance because of the styles of Russian iconography or Greek. But you'll notice because he's a Hebrew. And if he's not the historic Hebrew Jesus, then the whole thing is nonsense.
Yeah, correct. Okay, to come back to the Jesuit. Okay, what else can I say? Still, I want to point out again this idea that this group is working, and it's always a bit nebulous. You don't really know who is the hardcore, who is the just the followers, who is laity, who is an actual priest, and they are taking advantage of this, to infiltrate. And now I want to go a bit further. Well, first of all, it causes a lot of problems because the papal bulls that I quoted basically said that now you have laity that can perform sacraments, which is not sacerdotal charge. What's the point of it? You're just damning people or performing false sacraments, even according to Catholic theology. But again, about this organization, and I want to talk about more as a more modern Jesuits. We see that they try to infiltrate a lot of things, and the first thing they actually totally took control over was the Vatican. So before they used to be the dog of the Pope, and now basically the Pope is a Jesuit. There was this idea that there is a black Pope and the white Pope, like the Pope, and the black Pope being the Lord Commander of the Jesuit, General of the Jesuit, and now basically Francis is both. So right now you have the fusion of it, and you see that the very interesting relations between the papacy and between the Jesuits have come to fruition. So they will not listen to the Pope and be very pragmatic wherever the Pope was not working for them, and they will push the Pope forward. They will prop him up when he was working for them. And at some point they even were disgraced. It was disbanded, but they still managed to come back. And right now the Pope has absolute power, and the Pope is a Jesuit. And you have a lot of people talking, maybe that's why Ratzinger was pushed aside. I'm not going to go into that, but now we have to think, because people who promoted all these heresies, people who we don't really know the dogma, we don't really know the relation to the occult, we don't really know what is the final goal. Is it just power? And we have them at the highest position of the Catholic Church. And
I think I want to make one little point too here about the geopolitical stuff that I stumbled upon. So as most of you guys know, if you haven't heard the full Quigley talks, I also did the other important Quigley book, Anglo-American Establishment, and he actually talks about the Rothschilds and the Cecil Rhodes roundtable groups being kind of the power behind the throne. There's a fascinating section in Anglo-American Establishment where Quigley details that the power structure actually utilized the structure of the Jesuits to organize that secret society. If you recall, Quigley refers to them as the Society of the Elect. The Society of the Elect was about the 12 most powerful European and British families: Astors, Rothschild, Cecil Rhodes, etc. There was about 10 or 12 of them. And then they had that was the inner core, the inner party, you could say. They had an outer portico of what they called 2,000 or 3,000 helpers. That was people recruited at Cambridge, Oxford, Eton. This is who's running the British Empire, basically. This is the model for the American Empire, right? So the American Empire does sort of morph out of this because the CFR, the Trilateral Commission, what's the power structure in the U.S., that was all set up by these people. So some of those families are not as important as maybe they were 100 years ago when Quigley was writing about them. But regardless, it's still roughly the same power structure. And they specifically said they modeled their inner society on the Jesuits. So once again, let's keep in mind, this is the same power structure as the Royal Society. That's who the Anglo-American establishment is. Same group, the Royal Society. Who are the biggest promoters of Darwinism and evolution in the last 100 plus years? Them. And who else? The Jesuits. There you go. I want to stress this. So, and I'm not saying that I can prove definitively that, secretly the Royal Society was allied with the Jesuits. Maybe, maybe not. I'm sure eventually people could probably dig that up. But what I am saying is that I don't think that it's an accident, and I do think it's interesting that these two global power groups, both the elite of the British Empire and the Jesuits, were so formative and instrumental in putting all of their power and influence into promoting Big Bang and Darwinism and all the frauds of Piltdown Man and Nebraska Man and all that stuff. Teilhard is there for all that stuff. Jesuits have been very influential in this, and I think that has to be kept in mind and stressed, as you pointed out, because now what we see is the entire Roman Catholic structure being run by a Jesuit.
Yeah. And that will be probably my conclusion as a Jesuit, is that even from the Roman Catholic perspective, there's a big problem here, is that the idea of the Pope, the idea of Catholic theology and the Council of Trent, this is done by and through the Jesuits. And even after that, the Jesuits were, allies, enemies, and anyway a very bad force for Roman Catholicism. It introduced heresies. It fought against the Pope, and this is not acceptable in Roman Catholic dogma. The problem is the enemy was in your midst, and no, you can't really be a Catholic and hold very adversarial positions to the Jesuits, but at the same time you can't really follow the dogma and follow the Jesuits. So you kind of blocked here. It's been infiltrated, yes, and I also want to say a quick word to the Orthodox. As I described, the Jesuit worked, as a core and then affiliates, which sometimes are not even, fully fledged Jesuits, allies and things like this, and they are working for the same thing. And now we should have a little look at the Fordhamites, because they are Jesuit affiliates. They work for the Fordham University, which is a Jesuit university, and they push the same stuff as the other Jesuit, and their allegiance will be towards the Jesuit.
It's also a CIA university, exactly.
Yeah, and basically you see like Archon, like this is equivalent order, to the Jesuits that start to pop up. You have priests in there, but at the same time you have laity, but they push for weird stuff, and sometimes they go like borderline heresy. And a lot of Fordhamites, they're also. So we should look at this, because it seems to take the same road, and yes, this is with the new tool of the Jesuits, which is over ecumenism, ecumenism, and this idea of dissolution. That right now we can approach all the things. So we're not going to fight. We're not going to mix it. We're going to bring things forward and just try to get our differences out, which all differences are actually dogma or faith, which is something very important, to just start, merging into this primordial thing, like, yes, this big blob religion, world religion, and that's what we're going to see with the Amazon Synod. They will basically say things like, yes, of course, he can worship tree, but in a way, tree is also God, and this is the whole creation, and there is no, it's all metaphorical, and that's how it's going to end, really. So yes, we should think about this, because this is a new method of the Jesuits, so Archon's work.
Yeah, and I think they're going to be instrumental in promoting the, New World Order type religion that Francis seems to be very keen to. In fact, he was just saying this week that it's time to create a new global humanist religion. Now, I'm going to really blow your mind here, everybody in the chat, just as a kind of a weirdo thing to finish off with. Probably some of you intrepid researchers out there could figure this one out for me, but this came up many years ago when we were doing a call with John and Chris. There's a very weird Jesuit cave, and it's called the underground Jesuit caves in Europe and they're filled with Egyptian, Islamic, and cartoon art. I am not joking. It's just outside the city of Maastricht in Belgium. And it's known as a Jesuit cave. I'm not joking. There's the link in the chat. Underground caves. And the artwork throughout these Jesuit caves, I know this sounds crazy. It's real. Includes cartoon characters. Now, why? I don't know. Maybe somebody can figure this out. Intrepid researchers. I suspect, I can't prove this, but to me it's reminiscent of sort of, it looks like mind control type stuff. It looks like the things that you would do if you were doing hallucinogens that you might show people, but maybe not. Maybe they're just bored and drawing cartoon scenes on walls. I'm not joking. I'm going to show you the art here. And again, anybody who knows what this is, please enlighten me, because I have no idea. But as you can see, here are the cartoon characters on one scene. There's multiple scenes like this. Really, really weird stuff. Literal cartoon characters. And I don't know when this one was drawn. They've been drawn, I guess, in different centuries. This was drawn in 1960. So here's your Jesuit Disney cartoonist. It includes a giant Egyptian snake head. Here's some more cartoon characters with puppy dogs bringing dinner, talking Daffy Ducks. I mean, are they just tripping out? Are the Jesuits just tripping a bunch of acid underneath the city? But it gets weirder and weirder because they also have other religious imagery, such as Buddha. Anyway, it's in the essay. That article. It appears, as far as I could tell, to be a real thing. Jesuits were past masters in copying world-famous arts and structures. There's even a version of Picasso's Old Woman in here. Why were they doing copies in an underground cave? I don't know. This is just really bizarre stuff. So just a weird one I wanted to throw in for everybody, Jesuit cartoon art. So, if you want to leave us some super chats as we sort of come here towards the end.
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to
go ahead.
To tell you that so Jesuits is not my preferred topic. So in the future, if you want to talk more about this, we actually have people from the same collective who actually studied this more, and we could go a bit deeper and probably go more into the occult side of things. I didn't really want to go there, but to bring a little bit more nuance, and in the future it might be possible we have other people who are interested.
I'm not really trying to go into that. I just wanted to mention it because it came to mind. I didn't want to forget the weird underground cave with cartoons. I couldn't resist mentioning that.
Yeah. But if you're interested in digging further, we have other people who are very, very much qualified, and yeah.
Yeah, so I want to make a point there that if you want to connect with Snek, his Discord is listed there. The French Ortho Bros have their own Discord. They do a lot of apologetic and translation discussion work in there. There's his YouTube channel. A lot of that's in French. And then also his Twitter, and he's pretty active on Twitter. So you can connect with his material there. Anybody who wants to support us, I'll do some super chats here. We only got one super chat right now. Lawrence asks, does anyone want to match my super chat? Well, yeah, there you go. Thank you. We do got a good crowd of 235 nerds in here, so I'm glad to hear everybody. Real quick, I'll read some of the devotions of Faustina Kowalska that we've critiqued here. In Divine Mercy in My Soul, she says that the host floated out of the tabernacle and rested in my hands. Later on in that book, page 89, she says, while I was holding the host in my hands, I felt the amazing Jesus power upon me. By the way, you're not supposed to hold the host, right? It's supposed to be given to you by the priest. But anyway, and traditionally speaking, right? But it floated to her.
And what's funny is that
Go
you've got Roman Catholic being very, like pushing, à la coque and people like this. But you have some of the traditional Catholics, like, instead of Vacantist.
Right.
I don't know how traditional that is, but for example, the Demon Brother
They won't
put out
accept
an article
her.
saying that, this devotion of Kowalska is wrong for all the reason we quoted. But the problem is it also applies to other devotions, like à la coque.
Exactly. Once you critique, this is a great point, Kowalska on these points, The same thing will apply to a bunch of these women saints. And I want to mention too, Gemma, who threw herself down a well. Yes, I know that some ascetics have gotten pretty radical and maybe mortified their body in a sense that would be extreme. That's different than being suicidal and throwing yourself down a well. And if you read, for Catholics, I would challenge you, read the Catholic Encyclopedia article on the Donatists. I reread it again actually a few months ago, and it was very instructive because I had forgotten, because I've read all the anti-Donatist works by Augustine. I'd forgotten the fact that the Donatists actually did this, and Augustine condemns them for this. The Donatists would throw themselves down wells, and he specifically talks about that. It comes up in the Catholic Encyclopedia article on the Donatists. So what I'm getting at is that this manifestation of devotion is not of God. It's heretical. It's prelest. Anyway, she goes on in her treatise, Divine Mercy, to say that Jesus told her personally, I want my specific mercy to be worshipped. If they will not adore my mercy, I will punish the whole world. I'm uniting myself with you as with no other creature. This is the Nestorianism that you talked about. If you pray, I will bless the whole world. I will punish the whole world. Tell your superior general that you are the most faithful nun in the whole order. You are the greatest saint, blah, 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 blah. There's all this nonsense, and you realize that this is all total prelest. And if you were to admit that that's all total prelest, then all of these same women that we've been talking about, and it's not just women, there's other weird men that did similar stuff, it would apply to all of them too.
Yeah.
And by the way, I just wrote that essay on the prophets of Baal, and it made me think of Elijah and the prophets of Baal, right? Cutting yourself and all this kind of stuff is exactly what Elijah faces with the prophets of Baal. JC Rubug, $10, he says, thank you both. Very many blessings for your hard work. Well, thank you, JC. Appreciate that. And do you have any comments on that?
Well, thanks.
No, I meant on what I was saying about Kowalska and the and that stuff.
Yeah, the thing is, it seems apparent, people start to realize that's what we have to tell, because people start to think for themselves. It's easier to get informations out, and we can start to understand. All these things were hidden. The fact that things were explicitly Nestorian, the Pope actually knew about it, but it was never brought forward far enough. For example, the Pope knew that the Holy Herd, Sacred Herd, and that Loyola were pushing for Nestorianism, but it was hidden later on.
The holy the holy what?
Sacred Heart, yeah.
Oh, Sacred Heart. Okay, I thought you said Sacred Herb. I was about to say the Sacred Herb, dude. It sounded like you said Sacred Herb, like Rastafarian.
Yeah.
Anyway, go ahead.
Okay. So Ruffling Steak said, what do you have to say about the Jesuit liberation theology? This is another ad hoc dogma, the same thing. They will have ad hoc dogma to integrate people. This is, I believe, part of the political movements in South America, and yes, it was created to adapt. It's another ad hoc dogma, basically.
You want to read the Wim Hof book? I've read that. It's good. Again, I'm stressing it because we want to understand there's a mythology amongst the trad anti-communist collective. I'm joking. The trad anti-commie world, where they are under the impression that liberation theology was a communist thing that the Jesuits pioneered. There's an angle, an element of truth to this, but it's also way off because it buys into the Cold War dialectic. And Wim Hof is great at busting that Cold War dialectic, because I want to stress that the main pioneers of liberation theology, yes, there were many liberal Jesuits and liberal theologians who did that, but they were doing that at the behest, not of Moscow, not of the KGB, but at the behest of their zillionaire banking Western elites that funded them. And Wim Hof grasps that. So he's a great myth buster to many of these trads, and that's why this book is so good. Also, I want to stress too, Occult Renaissance Church. If you read Occult Renaissance Church of Rome and you read the Wim Hof book, you will have most of your trad myths busted from the geopolitical and historic perspective.
Oh yeah, I've heard about this book. I should actually give it a read.
So that's what I wanted to say, Raffling Stakes, is that those books are really good in sort of busting a lot of this trad mythology. Like that AA 1025, that's actually just Cold War propaganda, this idea that Moscow is sending all of these KGB agents to infiltrate the papacy and all this stuff. The papacy was already corrupt. The papacy was already a problem way before Moscow was struggling with its atheism. So you have to understand the problems go back way beyond the 20th century. Vatican II is the outworking of centuries and centuries and centuries of issues and errors. It's not something that just pops up in the 20th century after Pius XII suddenly starts to, accept theistic evolution, and suddenly it's the infiltration of the Freemasons, right? That's an element. There's an element of truth to that, but again, there are problems that go back further. Even Malachi Martin, in his Jesuit book, admits the problem of the Jesuits, and he was a fake trad. Even the fake trads can know that the Jesuits are a huge part of the problem, and that it extends back even further than just the 20th century. Do you have any more?
You mean super chat? Or,
No, I mean, do you have any more information or anything else you want to touch on before we kind of wrap it up? Bella Dodd, that's what I was trying to say. No, I'm not saying that Bella Dodd's congressional testimony is fake. I'm not saying that. Bella Dodd, though, is putting out information, and a lot of the Cold Warrior people really thought that the enemy was the KGB in Moscow. But that is a faux enemy, is what I'm trying to stress to you. And even the trads are starting to finally figure this out. It's not the KGB that's bringing in the New World Order. It's the Fortune 100. What I'm trying to tell you is that the threat of communism in America was largely a fake threat. The real threat was the Fortune 100, who wanted the Cold War to transition us into the period where we are now. That's why I've done a 30-plus book analysis of the globalist writings of the last century, which shows this point. So it's not the communists versus the West. It's the international elite who are corporate, who are bringing in this technocracy. That's the real plan. And Francis and all his clown crew, they're all part of bringing in this new world order religion. They're the religious arm of this same plan. It's that simple.
Yeah, it's a continuation. That's a lot of people are trying to say that everything went wrong at Vatican II. It's a long work, and yeah, the papacy had inherent flaws, whether it be them dogmatic in ecclesiology. It started very early, and we've covered with the Jesuit, we've covered hundreds of years of history, and not a single good one.
Yeah.
And yeah.
All right. Well. Thank you for those super chats there. Again, if you want to support his work, I've got the links there in the show description. And if you want to support Jay's analysis, you can subscribe at my website, buy my books, sign copies in the shop. You can also join at the join button if you're on a Mac or PC, or you can just like and share. That's much appreciated as well. We're going to see a lot of algorithmic changes on YouTube in the coming months, so it helps, of course, to like and to share the shows. All right, thank you, Snek. This was a fascinating, excellent conversation. For people who want to get a little more of the central point about the differences in devotion, there's the excellent Jean-Claude Larcher book on the difference between the two churches in terms of the devotion. And then, of course, I would just say, again, for anybody who wants a brief treatment of the theology and how the theology it leads to the differences of practices and the praxis, read the debate between Palamas and a Barlaamite. I did a whole talk on it a couple weeks ago. It's only about 100 pages, and he even touches on the differences of devotions that were already becoming apparent back in his century when he was debating the Barlaamite. And the Barlaamite is essentially just another kind of roughly the Thomistic type of position, roughly speaking. All right. Thank you, Snek. Great show. Great talk. Much appreciated for all your information. Thank you, everybody in the chat and all the nerds. Great show. Anything else you want to say?
No, thank you for having me, and you will be available if you want to go further on some topics, or if you want to look at other things. And keep me posted for the movie review about Silence. I would really like to have your opinion.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad you reminded me of it. There's so many movies I need to get to. But all right, God bless everybody. Have a good night.